Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring, and joining me on today's show is Phoenix City Manager Ed Zuercher. Ed, welcome back to the show. We've had you on several times before after a summer hiatus brought on by the recent elections. We can't do these shows. We wanted to have you back and get kind of an update of what's going on with the city, but we really appreciate you being here as always.
Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Well, there's no shortage of things going on, so I'll get right to it. First thing, this is a taped show, so it's recent events now, maybe not when people see this, but President Trump came and spoke at the convention center. There were about 20,000 people downtown. Obviously got national, international news. Not all the people agreed with each other, so there was some conflict. I thought personally police managed it as adroitly as they possibly could. I thought there was no property damage, I think, that I'm aware of, and there's also no permanent injury. I know some people had some cuts and bruises, and you can't discount that, but overall, nobody was hurt in a very serious, long-term, meaningful way. To me, that screams success, particularly given what we've seen around the country, but I wanted to get your thoughts and your reaction.
Sure. Well, I think you're right. There were 20,000 people inside in the rally and others outside, and people got to express their First Amendment rights, and they did it safely and without injury and without property damage. But it was something new for Phoenix. It was national and international coverage, and also at the end, a few people got into it, and the police had to intervene and use different methods, including tear gas. So I think you're right. I think your assessment is spot on, that the police department did an outstanding job, and our police officers performed exceptionally well in managing a really emotional situation at the end. But during the day, for hours and hours during the day, people were peaceful and
people
prepared.
were down there at like 7 in the morning, right? I mean, I heard people were lining up, and there's traffic was a little dicey downtown just because of the influx of people. So to keep that combustible mix of folks all basically peaceable all day for what, 14, 15 hours?
In the heat.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
In 110-degree heat.
Right.
It's quite an accomplishment for the department.
It is. There's probably 12 hours of completely civil discourse, First Amendment rights being expressed. And at the end, some people got unruly and the police had to intervene. And that's what we're talking about taking a look at. But I'd also like to just talk about other city employees. You mentioned it was hot, and so our fire department was out there helping people. And of course our police was engaged, both civilian and sworn, because there's a lot of civilians who support the sworn police officers. But our water department was there with trucks for security. Our street department was there to clean up along with our sanitation. In fact, I was out at midnight and we had a streets crew that was out cleaning up around the Herberger. And by morning, the TV reports, people were saying, "Can you believe something happened here last night?"
Happened, yeah.
And that was a hard work of a lot of our city employees who were out there, plus the convention center staff who made the venue available for the campaign, and by all accounts from everybody, was really a great job by our convention center staff.
Yeah, and so obviously at the end, some things did happen, as you alluded to. Today being August 30th, we're having a council meeting. There's going to be an item on the agenda, I think it's $45,000 to pay to a firm that will evaluate the police. Now, I personally don't know that it's necessary, and so I most likely will be voting no. I'm willing to hear what you have to say at the meeting, but do you just want to give kind of what you're expecting to get out of that? How is that $45,000 being well used, and what are you hoping to achieve?
Sure. So the police department always does an after-action report. So they are currently going through their body camera video, the video they've got, how did their tactics go, how was it deployed, and that's important. They do that all the time. It was my judgment in this case that because it was so high profile and so emotional, and because the police had to use force that we're not really used to seeing in Phoenix, using tear gases, different flashbang grenades, which were part of their training. That's a normal use of force by police to keep a crowd controlled and safe, but it's different for us.
But I think you're saying it's atypical to actually have to use it.
Right.
They have the training to use it, but they don't normally use it.
That's right, and that's what we've heard from people on whatever side of the issue they're on, is just sort of amazement that it was used. Why was it used? And almost everyone has said the police exhibited amazing restraint. But the use of it, to me, is something that we ought to have a third party tell us, how did we do? This is not about any individual police officer's performance, because if you look at what our folks had to do in the heat and the dark after 12 hours and managing this, they did remarkable. But how are our policies? How did we do overall? That's what the outside group will do. And they'll do it in a way where people can't say, oh, well, the city manager has a predisposed notion or the police chief has a predisposed notion. It would be a third party objective look at that. But as you said, it costs a little money. It costs $45,000 because you have to pay someone to come and review all those hours of materials and talk to folks. So that is the decision before the council.
And again, I don't necessarily agree with that assessment, but I did want to have viewers, have the chance to hear your thoughts on why that's necessary. And I thought it was really a proud moment for the police department in terms of the way they handled things. And I would hate to see them second guessed, but I understand, your perspective as well. So we might have to respectfully disagree on this one issue, but I do think it's something that viewers certainly, we're still talking about it, several days later, and I suspect will be for quite some time.
Right, and I think the reality is they are being second guessed no matter what. So to me, having an external objective review, one thing I hope is that it helps us educate the public about how complex and difficult it is to actually be a police officer in these sorts of settings. But in addition to that, the police officers are already doing an assessment of themselves, and that's important.
So switching gears a little bit, the economy, our budget. How are things going? We're almost 2 months into the fiscal year. I'm sure we don't have data for August yet, but you're watching these things closely. Consumer confidence hit an all-time high. I think it was today or yesterday, not all-time high, excuse me, but a 16-year high. So where are we at as a city? We had projections about deficits next year. How is that all shaking out?
Sure, those great questions. So as we think about our projections, we've done a better job of projecting what our revenues are going to be. And you were here 4 or 5 years ago when our projections were off. We would predict a big increase and we wouldn't make it, and then that would send us into turmoil. And
we were an outlier compared to other cities.
That's right.
When I went and looked at other cities, I didn't understand how we got there. So we're doing things differently, and I think they've been more accurate.
Right, and you supported us engaging more closely with the University of Arizona economics group, and they are helping us so that this year we came within 1/10% of our budget estimate on revenue, which is important.
It's quite an accomplishment for those who follow these things. I mean, you're talking billion plus dollars floating around. It's hard to be that accurate.
And the good thing is it makes it easier or simpler job for you as a decision maker when you can be confident in the information you're getting. And I think that was the point that you and the council made with us having to tighten up how we do our projection.
Right. We may disagree about how to spend the money, but it's important to know how much money are we actually going to have? And frankly, a few years ago, when you're way off like that, and there's a lot less money, and you're starting to have to trim the sails sort of midstream, that is not good for anybody, no matter what political persuasion you are.
That's right. So we can be confident in our revenue estimates. And what we saw from the city's revenue collections is good, solid economic growth in the 3% range in retail sales, but also strong growth in hotel and motel lodging, because we're a tourism town, and District 2 I know has some of the best resorts in the valley in the state. That's important to our economy, and restaurants and other dining. So there's good solid economic activity, but the one encouraging thing about it is this is happening without a huge spike in new home construction. The last time we had a solid economic recovery, it was really based on single family home development. What we're seeing now is a much broader based economy that is not dependent on one sector like home building. We certainly are seeing more home building. I know up in your area, there's some large
There's some, but
areas.
It's not the huge tracts. I think at the peak, we were having 60,000 or something home starts a year. I don't think that was just Phoenix. I think that was valley-wide. Right. Now we'd be happy to get 20, and I don't think we're going to hit that. So everything else has bounced back, as you suggest. So hopefully that'll strengthen us in the future for the next downturn, which will inevitably come.
Right, and that diversity of our economy. So if I think about District 2, when you have Mayo Clinic and ASU and a partnership up there creating jobs, you have good employers up there, American Express and others, USAA, which is close by. That sort of broad-based economy that supports the housing growth is important, as opposed to housing driving other things. And so I think we're seeing a solid foundation for our city's economic growth, and not a bubble that we have to deal with like we did 10 years ago, which means that we can have a little more confidence in our budgeting.
You're still projecting a deficit?
Yes, the big thing we have in the city, and our revenues are growing, but they're not growing as fast as our pension obligations, and particularly our public safety pension obligations.
And if I could interrupt for 1 second, we should point out, while the revenues have grown, they've only just recently gone past where they were in about 2007, 2008. So the downturn really hit us hard. Now things are going up, but we're just sort of catching up to where we were before. It's only through efficiencies that we've been able to cobble things together over the last few years.
That's absolutely right. So it's sort of a lost 10 years of revenue. So we're pleased to get back and actually now be exceeding that. But over those last 10 years, as you were part of the committee that worked on that, developing those efficiencies in our mindset and in practice is what allowed us to survive as much as we did with the growth in pension costs.
Bill Gates deserves a lot of credit,
yes.
And Tom Simplot as well.
That's
they really
right.
worked on both those issues.
Right. So those the pension, working on that is the biggest thing that's driving our budget discussions. Last year we said if we didn't do anything, we could have a budget deficit between $40 and $60 million for 2019. We've been working over the summer and trying to narrow that gap. I've got all the departments going through and combing through everything they're doing to wring out more efficiencies out of their administrative costs, and we're going to bring that to the council this fall. We'll also have a better projection of where our costs and revenues are to see where that is. But I think we're going to be looking at a deficit maybe somewhere in the $20 to $30 million range that we're going to have to talk about how are we going to deal with that.
Now, a few years ago, I want to say maybe it was 2014, so it's probably for the 2015 budget, fiscal year budget, if memory serves. So we had a budget deficit of maybe 15 million, 20 million, I can't even remember now. It's been several years. And I know fees were raised, parking was raised, fees at our community centers was raised. Anything like that on the table, or you're still trying to see what you can wring out of it before we actually get to that point?
Yeah, it's still early to know that. My message to our departments has been, we can't even begin to have a conversation about revenue or programs before we've made sure that we are spending every last dollar on administrative tasks appropriatly. And so that's why we're going through and combing through this summer. And I'm hopeful we can maybe get $6 or $7 million, about, almost 1% of our budget reduced just through those actions. Let's look at our vacancies one more time. Do we really need to print those things? All that work is going on right now.
Yeah, every 1% is what, about $12 million? $10
to $12 million,
yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, that's important. I know you're not wearing your penny today, but I know you usually have department heads
Right.
wearing their pennies to remind themselves.
That's right.
These are, for me, just as a fiscally conservative person, I mean, it's important to make sure we're getting the best bang for the buck. We don't always do that, but I do applaud your efforts in trying to do that, and really have, I mean, we're way over $100 million now in ongoing savings that accumulates over the years. It's not just a one-year deal.
It's actually over 125 million.
125 million now, yeah. So we're not having cake anymore when we
No
pass those
cake.
kind of milestones?
No.
Okay, because 100 million, we got
We
cake.
can't afford cake.
All right, we can't afford the cake. Fantastic. Good policy. Can't afford it on the waistline either. No. But it's all right. Well, so it sounds like, you're still working. It is very early, as you said, in the process. I'm sure we'll have you on in the spring to talk about where the budget process is then as well. Just wanted, our viewers to sort of know what they can expect going forward. A lot of this is pension cost driven, as we've talked about before. Maybe we won't get into so much today, but it's a huge issue for us, and it continues to be an ongoing one that people see in the paper. It seems like almost on a daily basis. So, but for next year anyway, it sounds like you're somewhat optimistic. Guardedly optimistic is the way I would categorize your response.
I'm guardedly optimistic that we are making good progress against what we thought was going to be a significant budget deficit, that we can get it down to a much more manageable range.
A $60 million problem, you're kind of outside. I think the food tax took in $55 million a year, so you're talking about, not that anybody was saying that explicitly, but you'd have to bring that back, and you still wouldn't have been quite back to even.
Right.
So that puts it in perspective,
Puts
I think,
it in
for
good
viewers.
perspective, right.
Yeah. Switching gears again, there's no shortage of things going on at the city. The hotel. So that's been much in the news, much discussed. Deal is, I guess, going to be put forward in official terms fairly shortly. Right. So where is the hotel deal at?
Right, so the Phoenix Sheraton Grand, which is owned by the city of Phoenix, we do have a firm that has made a bid on the hotel that we're working through the due diligence on.
This is the same firm who made a bid last year that looked a little different. I think you'll tell viewers because it wasn't as fleshed out as
Right.
it could have been.
as you do with large purchases, they had a due diligence period, and they learned a whole lot more about the hotel operations and the tax situation on the hotel. So they've come back with a second offer for us. It's been in the paper at $255 million, which would pay off a big portion, but not all, of the debt that still remains on the hotel from its development.
So from my perspective, obviously, we're going to lose a lot of actual cash. Is there any way around that? About $87 million, depending on how you view the, I think it was $42 million that the city put in for ongoing expenses.
Right. So the city put in about $47 million between land contribution, operating funds, and then in the downturn in 14, 15, 16, the sports facilities fund of the city had to pay the debt of the hotel instead of the hotel revenues generating it. So you add that up, and the gap between the sales price and the debt that we owe, that the hotel owes, could be about $87 million invested in that to date. Now, it's important to know none of that came from money that we have used for programs in parks and libraries. It's from a fund that is generated by rental car taxes and hotel taxes.
It's still tax dollars.
It is still public money.
If you go, I think Bob Robb said, if you go crying your beer at a local watering hole, you're helping to pay into some of that.
Well, he was speaking of the convention center.
Oh, the convention center. That's right.
Right.
That's right. I'm mixing
what he
mine.
was
It was such a good line
He-
that I had to borrow it. I wanted to make sure I gave him credit.
I think he was referring to the
Yes,
convention
you're right
center.
about that. No,
On the hotel, it is from rental cars and other hotel taxes.
I'll stick with Churchill quotes from now on instead
Okay.
of Bob Robb. But he did made some salient points about who's paying for what. You know, there's still taxpayers here, or their families certainly, who are contributing to this. Personally, I don't think it's as good a deal as we could get on the hotel. I'm willing to hear more, but certainly I'd like to see us sell a hotel. I think we're going to lose money on this. But the Jeeplet is also a little bit of a sticking point for me. Do you want to explain sort of how that works? I understand the theory of right now, because it's government owned, it's not paying property taxes, so it will be paying more, but you know, it's still not as much as a private sector entity would pay. Is that a fair assessment?
Right. So GPLET is government property lease excise tax, and that is a provision where the city can own an asset, and then the builder or the lessee, the person who leases the asset, doesn't pay property taxes. They pay a lease tax, which is less than property tax. In this case, the proposal would be to have that GPLET, as it's known. But as you said, currently the hotel pays no property or lease taxes because the city owns it. If we would do this transaction, the owners would pay lease taxes to the school district, the elementary school and high school district, the community college, the city, and the county. Would be less than property tax would be, but it would be more than the zero that's being paid today. So that's sort of the evaluation that the council is going to have to make about the value of that provision. And because of that provision, the company will pay us more for the hotel because that's of value to them.
Now, another issue that may or may not be coming up this fall, but is definitely coming up in fairly short order going forward to next year, the stadium, the Phoenix Suns stadium, not the baseball stadium. So can you explain how the hotel ties in with the basketball stadium?
Sure. So the Talking Stick Resort Arena, or you and I probably remember it as America West Arena back in the day, U.S. Airways Center, but the arena is also owned by the city, developed jointly with the Suns back in 1993. It's hard to believe it's the third or fourth oldest basketball arena in the NBA now. It seems like it was just yesterday we were celebrating the Charles Barkley era in a new stadium.
I think that was the first year of the stadium.
It was,
it?
yeah, no, that's right.
An auspicious start.
Right.
Unfortunately, hasn't
We'd like to see it
translated,
repeated.
but yeah.
So the city owns that, and the Suns operate it and invest in it. It's now at a place where it really needs to be significantly rehabilitated. And the funding source for that is the same funding source that backs up the hotel property. So if we sell the hotel, that relieves pressure on the same funding source that we would use to renovate and upgrade the arena.
So if the arena was bulldozed, then it would have to go to a vote of the people of Phoenix to have a taxing authority to go ahead and build a new one.
Right.
Is that's accurate?
Building
statement?
a brand new building, the charter says we have to get voter approval to build a brand new building. This was what we're seriously looking at is a renovation of the existing facility.
Which would not require a public vote, no matter how much it costs.
Correct.
It's not cost driven.
That's right.
So what are the parameters? Because people do ask me this as I'm out and about in the world. So what's the difference between, at what point? Is it leaving one wall up? Do legal experts know?
Yeah,
At what point?
I don't know. We'd have to have the city attorney talk
Okay,
to
so
that.
there's still a review of
Yeah.
what's the difference between a rehab and a building a new building. I think people probably have a pretty good grasp of what a new building looks like, but this would be something different. There are other folks, I think, sniffing around in terms of developing around the arena. Obviously, it's got the baseball stadium on one side of it, but at what point the hotel? So if the hotel deal goes through, then I guess it goes through. If it didn't go through, is there money, because this is another question I get asked often, is there still money then to put into an arena, or is the arena on hold? I know we had the T-Gen building as well. If the hotel gets sold, then that's one thing. If it doesn't get sold, what happens then?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you said, we have sold the T-Gen building, and so that was also resting in that fund that
And those are the
supports
two,
the
right?
arena.
Yeah.
And the hotel depends on that fund that supports the arena as well. So there would be a much diminished amount of money available for the arena if we continue to have the hotel. If we continue to own the hotel, there's not going to be as much available for us to be able to renovate the arena. So that's the connection there is you have to have the hotel before you can really significantly address the arena. And the arena is actually, it's a great footprint for basketball. It's built for basketball. It's the right size for it. It just is now almost 25 years old. And
It
so
struggles with the big concerts. The fellow who manages it for us, he lives in my district. I've talked to him about this extensively.
Right.
You know, they're so elaborate now and everything. The roof just isn't
Right.
heavy enough or strong enough, I guess, to handle some of this heavy
Right.
equipment. So we do lose some revenue to our friends in Glendale,
Yeah.
I think, because they're having a newer stadium
right.
that a team is interested in leaving.
Yeah.
A discussion for another day.
Another
It's not
time.
our team, but
And the arena, actually, you make a great point, Councilman. The arena is actually less about basketball and more about the concerts and the ice shows and I guess the circus not so much anymore, but the other things that are going on. There's a Marvel Comic-Con thing going on there. That's what brings so much activity to downtown. Over 200 nights of activity in downtown.
and there are only,
that
I think,
benefits
41 basketball games unless they make
Right.
the playoffs. So
Yeah, between the Suns and the Mercury, there's maybe 60 nights of basketball, and there's almost three times as much of other things besides basketball in that arena. And that creates activity, that generates taxes from people who coming from outside of Phoenix, and that helps every part of Phoenix.
maybe it's impolite to ask, but so there had been discussion among some members, and I know the mayor's State of the City speech, I think in 2016. So the Coyotes, when can we expect activity on the stadium? I'm kind of curious, just as a council member, because we haven't had an update in a while, but also, is that still in play? I mean, where is that at in discussions?
Yes, we are doing an assessment of what would it take in order to have hockey work in the arena. First indications are that it'd be very expensive because the arena was built for basketball and a hockey rink is significantly bigger than a basketball floor.
Which is why they moved to Glendale in the first place. I've been to hockey games there,
right.
and it doesn't fit the ice.
That's right. And so you'd have to significantly redo the arena in order to make it work for hockey. And what we'll have to do is be able to evaluate how much additional cost would it be to make it work for hockey, and is that worth it? We don't have that data yet, but we've been working on that over the summer.
And the council had voted on that, if I remember.
The council just asked us to be able to give them
To do the
comparison.
study, though. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, to do the study is what I
Right.
meant. So I think the study was funded. That's ongoing, and then we'll find out the answer to that sometime this fall.
This fall,
Is that
right? But as you noted, the Coyotes have a facility built for hockey in Glendale, and so they need to work that out.
As I go around and knock on doors, Coyote fans sort of ask, kind of where are we at for that? I don't really have a good answer because it's been discussed for quite a while, but it hasn't really reached fruition yet. And the hotel thing has been, as you suggest, a little bit of an impediment too, particularly if the hockey, making it a hockey arena as well would make it more expensive.
Right.
If we don't sell a hotel, we get less money. So these are intertwined things.
That's right.
It probably did not seem like a natural transition to go from hotel to sports stadiums, but they are definitely intertwined.
They are connected.
For our purposes.
Yes.
So, yeah. So, well, anything else? What else is going on with the city that we should know about? You talked about Mayo Clinic, and we've invested some resources up there to make those properties ready to go. You and I have had quite a few meetings along with the mayor, Michael Crow, Wyatt Decker from Mayo. How are things going? I mean, there hasn't been quite the activity that maybe one would expect given the number of meetings we've had, but at the same time, I think the enthusiasm level is high amongst all the participants.
Well, it's really critical because that whole corridor up in District 1 and District 2, along the 101, from the Scottsdale border all the way west, even across I-17, that's really an important economic development corridor for Phoenix, and we want to do it right. So the Mayo ASU partnership with the city of Phoenix that's really important for high quality jobs, that people from North Phoenix can work in North Phoenix. USAA is making plans to have significant expansion, is my understanding, in terms of jobs. And there's some development in the Norterra area for housing and other things. We're also working with the State Land Department on Paradise Ridge over between the Scottsdale border and Desert Ridge. There's renewed interest in doing quality development there that supports economic development. So there is a lot of available space and room in the area to do really important things for the city, including starting perhaps with the Mayo ASU City of Phoenix partnership.
We only have a couple minutes left, but there is one issue that you and I had discussed, but I don't think you've been fully briefed, and because you haven't, I haven't either. The FAA, the city won its lawsuit just yesterday. I think that was August 29th. So we beat the FAA. The question now, as I understand it, is whether they appeal,
right,
and what happens in that interim period, and how long does that take?
That's right. So the city of Phoenix and the historic neighborhoods in the central part of the city had joined together in a lawsuit against the FAA about the change in flight paths. And I know you've been working on that with Senator McCain and others over the last couple of years. So the court in Washington, D.C. ruled in the city's favor that the FAA acted arbitrarily and capriciously in changing the flight paths without proper consultation of the city or of the affected areas. So now we have to see what that means in terms of how quickly does the FAA have to return to the previous flight paths, and whether they'll appeal will be a big part of that. So I think that's going to unfold in the next 30 days during the time that this is showing on TV as to what the FAA's next move is, because right now the city is in the position of having won an appeals court verdict.
It's a big win.
It's a huge win.
It's a big deal.
It's a huge win, and it validates what your constituents have said to you and what we've heard.
The constituents won. I think that's appropriate.
That's right.
Sorry we're out of time, so arbitrarily and capriciously I'm going to cut you off. Sorry, Ed, but thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you have questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at phoenix.gov/district2. We look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.